Welcome to this edition of Free Speak, a podcast of the Namibia Media Trust, and I'm Gwen Lister. 30 years of independence is a celebration in itself, especially as we freed ourselves from decades of colonialism and apartheid. But it's been a long and hard road, and the youth have very strong opinions about where Namibia is today as a country. Investigative journalist Ndapewoshali, Shapwanale.
So we have the people, but are they ready to step up?
And lawyer and activist Nafimane Halweendo.
We don't have a large group of young people who say we stand against corruption. Truly.
Are my guests to talk about problems and solutions and what the youth can do to make ours a success story. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Let me start out by saying, 30 years on, what do you see as the major problems and the major gains of independence? Nafimane, can we start with you?
Well, I think it's easier to start with major problems.
Yeah.
And I think it's good that you indicated that we come from society of systemic racism. And I think one of the major problems is a lack of ideology. The liberation struggle wasn't just about fight. It was about an ideology to free the people. And I think that is a major lack if you're looking at a post-dependent society.
Any positives that you can think of?
Well, the positives, definitely there's some positives. If I'm going to be honest, the positives come mostly in the form of a peaceful society. Mm-hmm. I think the tourism industry is flourishing, but if we're looking at the basic amenities and the fact that most people don't have basic amenities, the positives are mostly just the fact that Namibia is a peaceful country and the tourism industry could flourish.
Good point. Ndapewoshali, what about you?
I'd say leadership is our biggest problem at the moment. Without pointing out, I'm not saying the head of state per se, but leadership in itself on all levels.
In
general, we have a very big lack, and again, I think it's because of, like Nafimane said, ideology. We don't have an idea of what exactly we want to lead the people into. How exactly we want Namibia to be led in this time. Back then, the fight was liberation. Now it's economic emancipation in social fairness. But then we lack a proper leadership that also dwindles down to the last person, from executive down to local authority. There is a big lack of proper leadership there. The good, I think, is because we have systems in place. I've visited a number of African countries where not even just removal is a problem. There's no system for something that small. But here's the thing that if one day your dustbin is not picked up in a week, you can even call people to come pick it up. So we have systems in place. Our judiciary, I think, is the separation of powers, number one, and all those other systems that make the country work. We have that. So for me, that's the positive. The negative is leadership.
We'd like your feedback too. So please listen in and join the discussion on the NMT feeds on Facebook, Twitter, and on SoundCloud. Nafimane, where would you have liked us to have been 30 years after? What would you have liked to see Namibia be, if you like, right now?
I hope I'm not overshooting the mark when I say this, but a lot of people say, they criticize government when they say Namibia's population is so small. And my view is that we really have the potential to create an oasis of a society living with at least the basic amenities. After 30 years, I would have thought at least most people would have access to basic water and electricity. Most people would have at least decent accommodation. Most people would at least have access to basic education. That is the bare minimum. That is what I thought this is where I thought we would be after 30 years, but that's not the case.
Not the case.
Yes.
You know, in 1983, I think it was, I interviewed our founding president, Sam Nujoma, and he said to me at the time, and these are his actual words, I want Namibia to be the first success story of Africa. And I thought that was very significant at the time. And
I think very possible too.
Exactly. And I too had a dream that with a small population in a big country with good, adequate resources, that we could feed, clothe, house, educate, everybody could have the basics. Of course, we're not there, unfortunately, as you both have pointed out. But what do you think, Ndapewoshali, about that? What would it take to make us a success story?
And I don't think it was even far-fetched for the founding father to say those things that he said at that time. We have, as much as some people say that the fact that we have a smaller population works against us sometimes when it comes to consumer and production and so on, but we also have it actually to an advantage. The very reason that we don't have a big population is the very reason why we're not supposed to be struggling. We're not supposed to have 30 years later where someone is a luxury to have clean drinking water. We're behind. But can we get to where we're supposed to be now? I think yes, but there are a lot of things that need to be put in place. There are a lot of legacy issues. There are a lot of legacy decisions that need to be done away with, and ways of doing things that need to be done away with in order for us to be what we were supposed to have been already now. And we'll probably not see it in the next 10 years, but I think if we fix it now, then at least 15 to 20 years from now, then we can definitely say that we are that success story.
How key, Nafimane, is education in this success story?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I say it's an interesting question because Namibians are some of the most educated people. The Namibian youth, of course, we've looked at the economic recession that started, I think, 2 years ago. And the reason I say it's an interesting thing is because one would assume that the more educated people that you have, the more thrive in terms of industry that you're going to have. But then we have a large amount of educated people who cannot even access industries. Young educated people cannot make a change. They cannot use their skills. So it's sort of an anomaly that first coming from independence, you're saying, look, we need to educate as many people as possible. But then we have now seen that with things such as corruption, it doesn't matter how many educated people you have, because if the resources have been planted by a few, there's no space to even pay salaries. I mean, we know that we have one of the biggest wage bills in terms of the civil servants, but it clearly indicates that corruption has eroded various industries to such an extent that mining companies simply cannot take in more engineers. They need to have cost-cutting measures. Medical practices need to have cost-cutting measures. They can't take in new personnel. Law firms, it's the same in every industry. So to a large extent, things such as corruption have made education redundant because there's simply no space for the educated young people in the society, regardless of how highly educated you are. And I think we've seen testimony of people with master degrees turning into taxi drivers or just whatever job they can get to make a salary. And that indicates to you that as much as education is important, you need a fully functioning government, you need fully functioning industries, and you need a healthy economic environment in order for education to be meaningful.
And maybe just to add on what Nafimane said, it's so important, like you go to school, you study something because that's the career that you want to pursue. But then what you end up pursuing is out of what is available. So what you do in your career is not set out by what you've studied, but what you can do, what is accessible to you, what is available to you.
Right.
And we've seen it so many times. You'll find someone who is in a whole different industry from what they have studied. And it goes back to the corruption thing. You're forced into this corner because here where you are qualified and certified has been occupied by someone who knows someone or someone who has a certain connection. It just already shows that where we are now, if a survey needs to be done in Namibia, and we look at the people in the different tourism and the legal fraternity, marketing, journalism, if you look at all the sectors, and you have to really see who is in these sectors, you'll find very much it's either people who did a certain qualification, saw that they've been blocked or they're not getting a way through, then they had to do a secondary qualification, or just people who have a certain qualification, but they're forced into another sector because their space here is taken up by someone who's been forced in or someone who was brought in because they know someone. I'm one of the people who believe that it's not only because of the qualification, but it's also about the reasoning. It helps you reason. It helps you make decisions.
But it's weird when you touch on the aspect of you being educated, and then of course you apply for a job and it's taken up by someone who knows someone. And at the very beginning of cronyism, we don't see it as such. You never think it can go to such a large scale where a majority of educated people simply cannot get jobs unless they know someone.
Exactly.
And that is the problem when things like cronyism starts and what you term light corruption.
Yeah.
It starts off as something that makes sense, something that's pragmatic.
Sure.
I know Ndapewoshali, therefore she should be employed, instead of just having an open process where everyone applies and equally the best
merit is the fact.
So I think, honestly, Namibia, 30 years down, taking issues such as corruption, cronyism, and tribalism lightly from the beginning. You for instance say, no, I don't want to work with Kwambis, or I don't want to work with Afrikaners. It starts off small. It's a small company that you're having, and you want to work with specific tribes, or you're only going to employ specific people that you know. But on the larger scale, as issues become national, you then realize that cronyism is affecting the economy itself. Because it means the skills that the people in the positions are not the most skilled, which means the output is also not the best output that industry or that specific parastatal could have.
Exactly.
So I think that also has contributed largely to why we are so far behind from the mark that we thought would be in terms of independence.
So it seems you both agree with something I certainly feel, that there has been in place since independence almost an entitlement culture. And that entitlement culture has been who you know and what you know. And we used to call it back in the day jobs for comrades. And we started off on that foot. So it seems to me from what you're both saying that a certain number of people were marginalized because they didn't have that kind of access. And that would obviously include, to a very large extent, the youth, who weren't in this club of elite people. And it is a problem indeed, I think.
I think I should contradict myself here.
Okay.
I for instance, to a very large extent, understand jobs for comrades in the beginning, in the early 90s. I say that, of course, if you look at the Constitution, things like affirmative action, they were necessary.
Yeah.
But
that's not necessarily the same thing.
Yes, right? It's not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
I think, of course, jobs for comrades is sort of like a light statement. But I think what it translated to this more serious aspects of corruption and cronyism, things like affirmative action are understandable. Things like having 50,000 people that are coming from Angola into Namibia, and the requirement for government to force them into position and accommodate them, that makes sense. But it makes sense within the period of 1990 and people coming in. But then the moment you take that as sort of the fundamental benchmark on how you're going to operate as a government, how you're going to operate as a party. Imagine if you are going to employ people only based on the party they're from, and you're talking about a democracy. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I think it then translates people, like I said again, ideology became corrupt,
Correct.
And it translated to everything that is wrong with government in the current day.
And you said something very important when you said that at that time it made sense. And during the period of 1990, because what was the struggle there? It was Namibia was independent. We had to, what is it that we wanted? In the past, and Namibians could not, there was the Bantu education system. Namibians could not choose where they want to go to school for. So it made sense, like Nafi said, that at that time, the jobs for comrades made sense, let's say in a political appointment. Yeah. Then you have a technocrat position, for example. You cannot say that the same arguments that we used to put a job for comrade qualifier there, you still apply it now because it was not the same. Yeah. Now we have to make decisions. Now a certain ministry needs to make a decision based on what the current economic climate is.
Exactly.
But a job for comrades person who does not meet the necessary requirements, or whose mind will not be able to make the right decisions, while it would have worked in 1992, 93, 94, it cannot work now because the struggle then was different from the struggle now. And unfortunately, we've moved from that era, and the jobs for comrades has continued.
Exactly.
Like Nafi said, the cronyism,
it should have been phased out.
It should have phased out. Yeah. It should have phased out, and that's why we're sitting with a ballooning, continuous ballooning what's it, the public sector.
Exactly.
That again, the wage bill continues to grow. It continues to take a large chunk of a government's money. Is because it has continued. It has continued that although they've reached 60 or 65, what the retirement age is, they have not worked enough to secure enough for pension, so give them 5 more years because they were at the front.
Exactly.
It has continued and has continued, but it doesn't fit now. It made sense then and it was working then, but not now.
And it did. Unfortunately, though, it set the standard, if you like, for what we're experiencing today, because a lot of those people who did return from exile were put into the civil service and or the army and police forces in large numbers, and those bureaucracies were already fairly bloated, in that SWAPO came to power with a policy of reconciliation and said the whites must stay, they mustn't go, they didn't want to lose skills and expertise. And I remember I argued about that at the time and said, let people go, especially those whites who have paid out their pensions in South Africa. Make that a requirement, that if they want to continue in the jobs they are doing, they need to bring those pensions back. They can't have the best of both worlds. But SWAPO was in very conciliatory mode at that time. And as you say, that's unfortunately what we're sitting with 3 decades later still. And then, of course, it makes things like the struggle children, you would probably agree, slightly redundant.
I'm after 30 years. Liberation struggle.
But there's something that I've picked up about independence from the judiciary. Imagine sitting in 1989 as a judge. And you're applying apartheid laws, and the judiciary did what you call an amazing twist. And they said, come 1990, 21 March, all judgments, if you look at the judgment, they're saying, look, we have a constitution now, we need to apply the constitution, it is not business as usual. And I make that example to highlight that it's important for politicians, journalists, lawyers, all the functionaries in society need to self-reflect at various intervals. And that doesn't happen. I say it doesn't happen because whatever was applicable in 1990 because of the political space cannot be applicable in 2010. It cannot be applicable in 2020. But you won't see it if you don't self-reflect.
Yes.
And that's one thing I love about the judiciary is, of course, they are bound by the supreme law such as the Constitution and so forth. So because they have to write judgments, and those judgments are subject to public scrutiny,
they can be modernized.
Yes, they need to really quantify why courts are thinking the way they're thinking. So it's easy for courts to self-reflect and say, look, I know this used to be the norm, but for instance, we need to extend human rights to this area because of constitutional principles, democracy, and so forth. So there's not really a lot of space for you to be redundant or you to be applying laws the same way they used to be in apartheid. Exactly. But for us, in various sectors in politics, it doesn't happen. A politician will have the same mindset that they had in 94. Empowerment.
Exactly.
The founding fathers said we need to empower each other, and by each other they're thinking SWAPO members only, for instance, or they're thinking these type of party members, for instance, only. And that goes on for 20, 30 years.
Yes, exactly.
That is toxic.
Exactly. And I think you both hit on a very important point, and that is, and has been, I think, probably reflected in our last election results. Exactly what you're saying is that sort of era of the comrade and that era of the all-powerful SWAPO, we couldn't have had this conversation, for example, just after independence. You would have probably both been sitting there giving me power salutes. But it's changed on, and the youth have realized that, hang on, we need to move on. Different things are coming into play here. We're not happy with the status quo. There is a lot of corruption, like it or not. The politicians keep saying it's not a problem. But I think those of us who know, just in our ordinary lives, that it's become pretty endemic, that it is a huge concern.
That's why, look, when the arguments, it was so fascinating for me to hear some of the politicians say that we don't have systemic corruption in Namibia. It didn't make sense, and I had to actually go back and I had to go get the definition. I needed to go get just the lay person's definition of systemic corruption. Let's look at what happened with Fishot, for example. If you are going to use a system that was put in place in order for you to carry out a corrupt activity, that is systemic corruption. It doesn't necessarily mean, and I think maybe that is what the defense is here.
Yeah.
When you say systemic corruption, we maybe feel it's almost like we're trying to. Maybe the understanding is that we're saying no, it's allowed, but that's not the case. And again, it goes back. I keep saying that with corruption, it goes back to the individual. It goes back to a group of individuals who decide that, okay, we're going to do this together, or I'm going to steal. I'm not going to go to work. I'll always just start work at 10. I'll go home at 4 or at 3, but I'm getting paid from 8 o'clock until 5 o'clock.
Exactly.
But it is systemic because I'm using the system. Let's say we have a system of when you go away with SMT. It's a system that we have in place of SMT.
Exactly.
Now, what do? I fake plan a trip somewhere. I can do it from my office. I can send an email, but I fake plan somewhere just so that I can get that money. It's corruption. It's systemic.
But Ndapewoshali, can I also add that we tend to look at government and we look at leadership and say it's all corrupt there.
Yeah.
People who have the power. But we need to maybe look, and I'm sure the youth are concerned about that, the actual moral fiber. And when I say moral fiber, I'm not talking about religion. I'm just talking about the rights and wrongs of Namibian society. And exactly what you're saying now is happening on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
Let's say any employed person thinks that 15 days sick leave is an entitlement. That in itself is a form of corruption by saying I will be sick simply to make use of those 15 days, even though I'm not really sick. So I think we have a bigger problem here than just corruption in the sort of upper echelons, but also that sort of trickle-down effect where everybody is thinking, I can do the same. And this is where I wanted to ask you, coming really back to the youth here.
Yeah.
How does the youth feel about that? How can we hear the youth saying, we're tired of this old leadership, and I have full sympathy for that. What are the youth, if they come to power and they slowly get into office, how and what are they going to do differently? And where are those strong role models among the youth that we've agreed in earlier chats we don't have among the elders? If you have to think now and you ask, who is your hero? Who do you admire? You'd be hard-pressed to come up with a name in Namibia, right?
Yeah.
But now, there are a few, they're not necessarily in government though. But what about the youth? Is there the talent? Is there the potential? Is there the ethical commitment among, let's say, certain sectors of the youth at any rate, to take this baton and run with it and make Namibia that success story? Is it there?
Even just before, and that's why I said with regards to corruption, it goes down to the individual. I don't think that it's a planned, it can't be a Namibia or a government or, well, it starts with the individual. That's number one. With the youth, I think that we have people in places, and it's like Nafimane said earlier when we were chatting about what Aristotle said, that the issue is that the smart people, yes, they want to be led by the politicians, or they think that they should not become the politicians. The ones with lower class should become the politicians. So then you're led by someone who can't reason. So we have the people, but are they ready to step up in that leadership
and go into politics?
Because we are forgetting that as much as you are a leader in, let's say, an executive director position in a parastatal or even in a private company, we are led by politics. A democracy is a politically led space. It's a democratic country is politically led, and we're not the people who. I think that the people who have the capacity, the people who are asking the questions, the Nafimane them who are asking the questions, who are interrogating, those type of people are not stepping up to be in the political spaces. Yeah. And then you find the let's say the hand clappers who don't really understand, and they're so not indoctrinated, but they've conditioned themselves in such a way that I need to sound political.
Correct.
I need to if my senior leader, if these are their beliefs, I need to believe in this also and push that belief in order for me to fall in favor, so that I'm being prepared to, when they one day leave, I then step in.
Exactly.
But there is criticism there. So I will never, the person who is in that political space will feel that I cannot attack this person. I cannot interrogate this person, because that means I fall out of favor and they are the decision makers.
Exactly. But I'll interrupt there, Nafi, just to ask you also quickly, it seems to me that there's, from everything that's been said and looking at also our election results and so on, that there's a little bit of fatigue or weariness with the ruling party, that they've got what it takes to make the change that we need to really go forward as a progressive nation in which all of its people have enough. That's the bottom line, isn't it? We want our people to have enough. My question to you would be, does the current political environment allow for that? You look at the ruling party, I mean, for example, going to the election booth in last year, who do you vote for? Are the alternatives currently really there where people feel, hang on, this party, this group really stands for what we believe in? And is there not room for the youth to create that alternative? Our political landscape is a bit tired, really. How do we create a new environment, perhaps in this new spirit of independence that now seems to be an important word when it comes to politics? Can we get there?
Yeah, I think the old cliche that you need to know where you came from in order for you to know where you're going comes into play here. And let's just look at apartheid era. Greed is endemic in society.
Everyone is.
So you have three types of people during apartheid. You have the apartheid government, you have people who are greedy in society, and you have people who are saying we are going to go out and fight. Okay? So in the current landscape, who do we have? We have the government that is leading, we have the people that are looting, then you have the youth. The question then comes here. If the youth is going to take a political space, what is their ideology? Yeah. And we realize if you relate it back to apartheid, the people who decided we're going to go out and fight, the ideology was quite clear. What are you fighting for? We're fighting for the political independence. How do you want to do that? Two things. One, we're going to take up arms. Two, we are going to lobby the international community. So they had very clear objectives. One, they had identified what the issue was. Secondly, they had the ideology that what we want is governance. We want, of course, human rights and equality were sub-structures in the major political fight. So, of course, those people went out and they fought. Those that remained and had, correctly, like you're saying, the moral decay, the lack of moral fiber, they stayed, and as we know them, they joined the Kuvut and so forth, and then the government was still there fighting against those that were trying to attain political independence. Today, if you were now looking at the political party that is heading the country, and you're saying, well, let's look at alternatives. The alternatives, even if it's from the youth, because alternatives can come from, senior citizens as well.
Sure.
And of course, the progressive ones would come from the youth, because the youth have energy, and of course, the people of today know better about where we are going to be tomorrow. So you should then we should ask ourselves as young people, what is our ideology moving forward? The country is already politically, the political independence is here.
Yeah.
Of course, you hear rhetoric about economical independence and so forth, and that would be a good direction to go. As you're saying, people are tired in the political space. We don't really have a way of assessing whether the policy of the government of the day is even sound for tomorrow.
Exactly.
So what we, the young people, what we should do is first, we should identify a clear ideology. Because if we then identify a clear ideology and say, look, we want to fight for the economic emancipation of our children tomorrow, it's easier then for us to have a conversation and talk to the masses and say, look, we have political independence. And I say this because most of the old guns, in terms of the old voters, are still stuck on, the euphoria of political independence that, as you said, happened in 1990. So it's quite difficult for you to garner support from them. What are you bringing?
Yeah.
SWAPO has already liberated the country.
Yeah, exactly.
When you talk of, is there an alternative? The alternative has to be specific in terms of why should there be an alternative? I know we're suffering, but people will ask you, why are you the alternative?
Exactly. And what are your goals and your objectives?
Yes.
This is important, I think, and that's often lost here.
Yes. I think when it comes to, it's a question I ask myself. Capitalism thrives because most human beings are inherently greedy, but they are turnable. Like you can basically convince someone that, look, the moral standing, that the moral degradation in society is bad, and we should move towards this ideology. You can do that. And as we've seen, Swapo during the apartheid days was able to turn many people and tell them that, look, my brother, my sister, I know you're in the government or I know you're assisting the apartheid government, but it's wrong. And a lot of people said, wow, that's quite true. If we're looking at government today, most of the people are floating about. I say floating about in the sense that a young person, you're employed under someone who for all purposes appears to be a good standing member of society. They lure you and they teach you corrupt tactics here and there. But somehow deep down, if there was a strong movement against that, you would most likely join them. Most young people are like that. I look at young people who are part of corruption today. I know deep down, I look at them and I see they don't really want to partake in some of these corrupt activities. But there's also no alternative. We don't have a large, we don't have a large group of young people who say we stand against corruption. Truly, yes. We don't have that.
And even on the ones that are coming out, and I don't want to mention any names at all, the ones who are coming out, the fight, or they're starting to become questionable because placed in a position where they're compromised, they get compromised.
Exactly.
Like they place themselves in a position of compromise with certain decisions that they make. And again, I don't know if Nafi would. I can't identify anybody. I can identify that they are a group of people, especially I think the young professionals who have the capacity to form decisions that they have the capacity to make certain decisions, but also to be able to be prepared into leadership. But then
if I may say, you look at it's not to say nothing is happening among the youth. If you look at something you're involved in, I think, which is Global Shapers, where there seems to be an intent behind that, which is why I talk about goals and objectives. Because if I had to ask either of you, where do you want to be in 10 years' time? I know, as an individual, I know I'll get very clear answers from the two of you. And this is something I do when I mentor young people, because it's good to have that goal, that passionate goal where you think, I need to be here. We need to do the same with our country. And we need to set us goals and objectives. I often say, if I was the president, and I'm going to ask you that question shortly, one of the things I would have done immediately, many years ago, and I wrote about it, was say to my education minister, your goal is in a year's time to have a library in every school in Namibia. And if you can't and you don't do it, there's the door. We need to be, I think, getting tough at all levels, really. And I'd like to see the same thing from the youth. In other words, the youth saying, hang on, this is where we want to be in international politics. We need to hear our government being more outspoken about human rights issues or violations in other countries. Myself as a journalist, I also want to see our country. And by the way, one of the good things about Namibia right now is we're still number one in the Africa Press Freedom Rankings. But I want to see that translated into the fact that our president or our information minister or whatever can condemn another African country when they arrest journalists and suppress freedom of speech or shut down the internet. I want to see that translated into a tangible commitment. And this is where I think the youth can get cues from that. And if you set those sort of targets, I think you will get where you want to be. But let me cut short, Nafi. Can I ask you, because we may be running out of time, I want to ask you the question, if you were president for the day, what would you do right off the bat? And I know it's not an easy question, but just what do you think you would do?
Well, you say it's not an easy question, and it's not. I think it's not an easy question because we're so far down in terms of problematic areas that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But if there's something I would do is the most effective for me, I think, for a day would definitely be to downsize on the redundant positions in the civil servant.
Okay.
I think immediately, if I were president for a day and just dismiss, if it's a ministry and they have 2 deputy directors or 2 what, I think immediately cut all of that.
Okay.
And I say that because the bureaucracy, the red tape it creates on top of the fact that there's no money.
And the cost.
Yeah, the costs of having redundant positions in the civil servant. That would be the first thing I would do.
I think that's interesting because you're absolutely right. I think everybody looks at that and says we have to cut the fat at the top. And I think you probably want to emphasize the top also. because as soon as you talk about redundancy in the civil service, you're playing with people's jobs and their lives. And this, as you know, is a very big political football. I think that our powers that be realize that our civil service is bloated. But if they start getting rid of positions from the bottom, it's going to cause probably civil instability. But I think you're absolutely right. And according to what we hear, this is something the president says he plans to do round about now for independence. So let's see. The test will be in the next couple of weeks.
One of the biggest reasons also I'll start at the top is if you look at modern corruption, I mean the normalization of corruption, it comes from the notion, especially at the bottom of the civil servant or at the bottom officials, blue-collar officials, upcoming white-collar officials. If the people have a presumption that people at the top are eating, it trickles down.
It does.
But of course, if you start correcting things at the top, it trickles down as well.
I hope you're right. I'd love to see that happen, because I often feel that our corruption is becoming endemic in a moral sense in Namibia. Now, I worry about that a lot.
But you would fear if it's coming from the top, because now the reason why people are so they fine with, or it's easy, it has become so easy, it has become normal to even tell your child that why did you steal a pencil at school? Mommy could have just brought you a box from work. I mean, that it has become so normal.
I get you.
So, but if I do believe that it starts from the top, and the top is punished and held accountable, at the bottom you will be afraid not to take the whole box, to even take one pen.
And you're setting an example, which is so very necessary.
Yes.
Ndapewoshali, what about you? President for the day, what are you going to do?
Definitely leadership. I think many of our problems is from leadership, and it's capacity. I think that we have the wrong people sometimes in the wrong places. There's no way. It doesn't help. You have a minister, you have the two deputy ministers, you have the executive director, but it is in the agriculture ministry, but the executive director knows nothing about agriculture. So even if you have a budget that is brilliant, that is more than enough, if that person who holds the purse of that ministry does not know agriculture, does not know that future, let's say it does not know that, okay, now we have to start looking at futuristic farming, I need to direct this money here, and we're going to continue failing. We're going to continue having issues. So I think mine would be correct capacity in leadership. That is the first thing I'll change. Leadership, by getting the right capacity,
right person in the right place.
Yes.
And often that's a criticism leveled, for example, at parastatals, which are continually failing.
The board members, from the executive directors, the ministers, and the CEOs also in parastatals, everybody.
And I often say that to people, because they say, you can be a very skilled person in a certain area, but put me in charge of a bank for a day, and I'm probably going to mess things up horribly, because I don't have the knowledge or the skill set that is required. Just to get on to another quick question for both of you, and that is another short question. If you were an unemployed youth today, and there are a lot of them out there, what do you think they would prefer? A roof over their heads, or a job, or a piece of land?
I think a job. If I should be a job, because then I'm immediately looking at continuous income, because there's nothing I can do. I can't do anything if I have a roof over my head. There's still water that needs to be paid, electricity, rent and taxes. The same with land. You can give me a piece of land. If I cannot develop it, what am I going to do with it? Even to put up a corrugated iron shack, I need money for that. So I think I'll definitely go for the job, and then from there see now how I'm going to, whether it is save or whatever, but I'm immediately looking at the income that's coming in, and then everything else I can get
put
from
in
there.
place.
Yes.
I asked that question, Nafimane, for a reason, and that is because there is a thinking, and it seems to be among the youth, because there are movements that are working in this direction, that it somehow is an entitlement that every Namibian is entitled to a piece of land or a farm. Is this realistic? Please give me
Can I just say one thing?
You may.
I agree with Ndapewoshali, but for a different reason.
Okay.
I think the average youth would want a job, or a salary, but not per se because we young people believe they can't develop the land, they can't get assistance, but because young people have created a culture of instant gratification.
Yes.
I don't think, in all honesty, because I say this because if you look at the red line, I'm from a Wambeland, and there are a lot of people in the Wambeland. And in the Wambeland, we have land. In fact, our parents are complaining and saying, look, we have so much land, you should do something with the land. Yes. But we don't, not because we don't believe that the land will bear fruits, but it takes time, and the young people don't have that culture of waiting anymore.
Exactly.
And that's what corruption does to a society. Like I said, it trickles down. So we young people, we see today someone is driving a Polo, tomorrow they're driving a Range Rover or whatever, and we want that to happen with ourselves as well. So I don't have time to be...
microwave nation.
Yes, I don't have time to be cultivating land.
But Nafi, would you take... because I was speaking from a point of land in the urban area. You can get... what am I going to... If I don't have it, I have no income.
Right.
Unless I tell myself... I even think even to be an entrepreneur, you need to start with something. And access to funding now, unfortunately, again, it goes back to leadership, because you'll find the NCRST, for example, is an entity such as that was put in place to look at what is it that Namibia is doing creatively, and let's fund that. They are so close that they like, okay, who is who talking about? Let's fund there, but they don't have the capacity to actually go in and say that let's fund here. And so I can't even risk that. If you tell me today, Nafi, or if you have to choose today, in an urban in Windhoek, that you need to choose between a house, a plot, and a job.
No, I hear you, but I mean, most young people, I mean, even if you said you're going to service it,
correct.
And let me extend the argument further. Even if you said, okay, it's not urban land, it's farmland.
Right.
If you say, look, you are unemployed, we'll give you farmland, we'll give you an official in the ministry who's going to assist you, the seeds or whatever, everything that you need. I'm telling you, most young people will choose a job, because most young people have that culture of instant gratification.
Do you think
I want
so?
a salary. I've seen it, and the example that I make of the North, you'll find people who have food in the North.
Yeah.
You unemployed people.
Right.
They live in the homesteads.
Right.
There's food in the North. Right. There's land, ample land, but they'll travel to Windhoek to come look for employment.
I see.
Yes.
Okay, that's very interesting, because don't forget, I think, I mean, we can't get into too much detail, but obviously we have organizations now. You can look at affirmative repositioning, you can look at Landless People's Movement, who seem to imply that this is the biggest issue of all. And I constantly find myself arguing with myself about this and saying, because it applies to me. I think I'm one of the only people who turned down veterans' benefits, which was a farm and 200,000, because I thought to myself at the time, first, I don't believe in any kind of entitlement or reward for struggle credentials. Secondly, I'd love to have a little waterhole somewhere where I go and watch the kudu to drink, but put me in charge of a farm, and I'm not going to be a productive citizen for Namibia because I don't know how to farm. So I'm thinking this is a very important question that doesn't seem to really be tackled. It's an aspiration
the entitlement
that it's the solution, but it's not the solution, is it? And I look back over the newspapers, and years ago we reported when the struggle children became a phenomenon not long after independence, and they were given resettlement farms. And it didn't work, and they're all back in the city and they're still asking for jobs. So
I think the systems also, if like how Nafi put it, if you give me a piece of land and I'm working together with agriculture, I'm going to support you. Even with a plot, if you tell me that, okay, you give me a plot, I'm going to support you, I will not build a house on that plot. I'll build a business on it. I'll say that, no, I want to do accommodation or restaurant or whatever, but it's the support there. And unfortunately, that's the thing. And I think maybe, or my thinking is that the reason why most of the answers would go to the employment way, at least you have this income, and then you can now decide, yes, I'm going to buy a plot, yes, I'm going to build a entertainment establishment or whatever. But unfortunately, the support now, I don't have enough faith in it to say that I'm willing to risk this, and then I'm sitting there with this plot. I've applied 20,000 times. I can't get it because corruption does not allow that, because I'm not who's child. I'm not who's child. I don't have this name, and therefore I don't have access to that.
But on the issue of land and whether that's the solution, while you have instant gratification in a lot of members in society, you also have instant solutions. A lot of African governments believe in the concept of instant solutions. I totally understand the difficulty that you raise in the issue of whether someone is going to be productive or not. But if we're looking at the long run, you, as a government, you need to have programs that yield results, of course, short term. Then there should be some programs that yield results in the long run. Right. And again, I need to go back to apartheid and just to show you that most of the people that were given land in modern commercial farm areas right now, they were not natural farmers.
Yeah.
No one was born innately a farmer.
Yeah.
But
they learned
learned the hard way. You know, people were suffering in South Africa and they said, look, there's Namibia here, there's land that is available. Sure. Either you stay in Johannesburg and die, or you go and you learn how to farm. Yeah. And it didn't take 10 years, it didn't take 20 years. Eventually, after a long time, people are calling themselves farmers. Yes. The word Boera means farmer.
Exactly.
Yes. So I think, and for me, it's speaking from an Ovambo culture where they say, look, it's either you're going to do the work that I'm telling you to do or you're going to die. And if we're looking at the economic times, if there is a possibility of putting people on farmlands and forcing them, of course, perhaps they'll fight it in the beginning and they'll be unskilled. But in the long run, unless we're looking for instant solutions, in the long run, it's going to be more viable in terms of solutions to the economic crisis than having people floating about
in the cities.
Is unemployed and
exactly.
so forth. Yes.
But again, as you say, it requires planning and it requires research and it requires help for those people.
And I think a genuine intention of finding a solution, because if you're doing it for cosmetic reasons and you're putting people on farms and you're not, following up and making sure that people are there and they're being productive.
And rendering the support.
Yes, the support. It doesn't make sense.
A lot of, because you go back to, there is no way that you can, like someone who grew up in Ovambo land, there is no way that you can say that that person cannot be resettled on a farm because they don't have the skills. Because in Ovambo land, as a child, you grow up herding, and you know exactly when the cows and the livestock needs to go, drink water, needs to come back. You know exactly when before the rains, when to plant, when to plow and everything else. That is farming.
Yes,
but now you put this person in a commercial setting where they need to not only maintain but generate. You can't just place the person there while they're coming from a communal subsistence farming, and then you place them in a commercial farming setting. No support, nothing. And then at the end of the day, you want to say that no, not everybody can be put on a farm because that's how they fail. But did you render the necessary support?
Exactly. You see, I look at something and it may be a very simplistic viewpoint, and I admit it, and I look at the recent drought, which hopefully has been broken in most parts of the country. But you look at the people saying there are 60,000 head of cattle or whatever the figure was died in the current drought. And I'm saying to myself, why? Why? Why are they dying? Why are we not slaughtering them before they die? We have a lot of hungry people in this country. And why are we not anticipating that my land cannot support 100 head of cattle, therefore I will slaughter X and I will feed the local community? Why are they just dying? But anyway, that's probably a question for another day.
I used to ask myself the same question as a small child.
And then people will talk to me about the spirit needs to leave the body and things like that. Guys, we're getting to the end here and we haven't tackled nearly all the topics I want to. Can I ask you just briefly a question about, because the Namibia Media Trust is also all about media and thanks media.
Yeah.
Youth of today are obviously flocking to social media. I understand an address I made at a schools a week ago, and when I asked kids to put hands up, where are you accessing your news and information, and I thought Facebook would dominate. It doesn't. The youth are on Instagram now in large numbers. I'm talking now scholastic youth. And obviously Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp is huge. And people aren't really reading newspapers anymore, and they often don't involve themselves enough in caring about their communities and what's happening. And Ndapewoshali, you know about this as a journalist, that they are a little bit disconnected on social media and following the Kardashians, and not only doing silly stuff, but a lot of it is silly, asinine stuff, instead of really taking an interest in their communities. Fishrot seem to have turned that around a bit. How do we, and do either of you see this as a concern among the youth, that they really need to read more and become more literate and more involved in what is happening in their communities, and not just on a superficial level, but to really change?
Can I speak before that, Roshali? Because I know you're both in the media.
Right.
Well, yes, the concerns are genuine, number one, and something has to be done, but my view is a bit devil advocate-ish. I think there's a duty on the media to explain its role. I say that because if you look at other entities, many other entities, they explain what they're doing, their purpose, and the ambits of how they work. There's a lot of misconceptions from us. I mean, speaking as a professional, even from me, there's so much I don't understand about the media. If propaganda comes and says the media, certain media house has its own agenda and it's pushing an agenda, I don't really have information where I can look up and say, well, what really is the agenda of that newspaper article? I mean, what is the agenda of the newspaper house? Things like that.
Yeah.
So I think...
So there's a kind of suspicion.
Yes. But not just a suspicion, there's also an absence of information to rebut that suspicion. Mm-hmm. And I say that there's a role on the media to explain... I mean, there's a responsibility on the media to explain its role.
Yeah.
So that we understand the importance. The freedom of the press, the freedom of expression, these are constitutional embodiments. Yeah. And they're not there for child's play. These are important constitutional embodiments. Exactly. So I think the media also needs to inform most of the young people that, look, we're not writing stories for... gratification or political affiliation or political agendas, but we serve an important constitutional purpose, and that is why we are saying the youth should engage the media. And then it's then for the youth to say, oh, now I understand, because the youth is on social media for things like for many reasons, but mostly for entertainment. Right. Because they know if I go on Facebook, I'll perhaps get something funny, or if I go on YouTube, I'll get something funny. Yeah. So if you want the media to... my love for reading newspapers was instilled by my father. And he always told me, you need to know what's going on in the country. Exactly. So it makes sense for me to continue reading newspapers until now, and then occasionally go and look for entertainment on social media. But the modern youth, the family disparities, they might have grown up in an era where parents are not at home, or that type of leadership is not there at the home level. So they think social media is where it's at. And you need then, as a media house, you need then as a media community to say the importance of reading newspapers, the importance of engaging the media on that platform is this. You need to get the accurate information, because of course the fake news phenomenon now, where anyone can Photoshop anything and put the Namibian logo or Sun newspaper.
And that happens a lot.
It's quite rife.
Yes.
So the purpose of reading newspapers has to be explained, especially to the youth of today, the 2000 era. People need to know, why should I read the newspaper?
Yeah. Why is it important? I think that's a point well taken, and I think hopefully those media practitioners who are listening will take note of that, because it's very important that they regain trust, if you like, and credibility among the people. And that's the way to go. But just to add to what you've said, and also to play devil's advocate, that same youth that are critical of the agenda of what we call the traditional media, which is newspapers, print and television, don't use that same discernment when they're online, I'm afraid, or on WhatsApp. And as you know, disinformation, which is deliberate misinformation, lies, in other words, proliferates on social media. It's a lot less easy for an ordinary media establishment like a newspaper to get away with doing that sort of thing. They wouldn't. They'd be taken to court straight away. So as I say, I want to reverse the argument on you and say I'd like to see a more discerning youth on social media and thinking before they on-pass what is clearly disinformation. I'm going to do you want to add something very quickly, Ndapewoshali, to that?
Nafi is correct in it, and it has to do with, unfortunately, yes, the youth of today, these kids are not, they're younger than the Teletubbies are. Yes. We have to, as traditional media houses, even in radio, now where there's this whole, with where I am, where talk radio is doing a thing now, but as traditional media, we have to move with the times. It can no longer be just a newspaper alone. The newspaper, it's not enough. It has to be newspaper with social media. Correct. And the same way that you cannot have the 800 word, because unfortunately the young kids, or even just the adults, attention span to read something that an article is 800 words or even 450 words on social media. We have to find another way to the way the consumer, how they consume news in a newspaper is not the same way they will do it on Instagram or Twitter, Facebook, and we have the duty. And again, also I've seen it with so many times when people say, yeah, but you didn't do ABCD. I've been guilty of that before. If somebody does not understand how the story came about, what the story is, I won't even explain it. And yes, we have the duty as journalists, because I don't think any of us journalists would ever even think of, let's take a Saturday and let's just have like a talk somewhere where you say, do you want to understand? Do you want to understand the media? Or let me go live on Instagram and say, like, ask me questions. Ask me questions. Exactly. Let me explain to you what the media. Let me explain to you how the story comes about. Let me explain to you the reason why there is so much. There's so many stories about black people, so many black people implicated in or most of the stories that you read on corruption, it has involves black people and less of white people. I can explain that if you look at the population of Namibia, 70% is and these figures are made up, but 70% majority is black people. So you will naturally, because of the numbers, but also because there's a lot of publics or a lot of reporting in regarding public funds and who heads those public funds. And again, also if you look at the private sector, the CEOs, you have white-owned companies, but they will most likely put a black CEO there, a black financial manager, black face there.
Tokenism.
Exactly. And who do I call as a journalist when I need to want answers to say that you guys unfairly dismiss these people? I need to call the CEO. Who's the CEO? It's not Jan van Riep or Jan Goeieman or whatever, who is the owner of the company. It's Peter Shilongo, who is the CEO of the company. So, but those are things you need to explain. Also, to explain why is it that I'm not writing as much about KPMG or any other white-owned entity. It's because I don't have access to the information. I don't have access to it because they're so closed off. The access to information bill that we're working on, a law that we're working on, it's not just for the public sector, it's for everybody.
Yes. Now, I think that's true, Ndapewoshali. And just to say in the wider context, I think what I'm more concerned about, obviously, is these hard fought for freedoms, which including freedom of the media, free speech and expression. Because I think people don't often realize, and again, Nafimane has pointed that out, they don't know that our freedoms are no more than anybody else's, we who work in journalism, and that if those freedoms are eroded, then so will theirs go. So my concern is that we don't, because Afrobarometer also show the declining levels of trust in press freedom in Africa, and how to convince people that this is not our freedom, this is your freedom we're talking about here. But finally, guys, and I think we are
at fault. I should accept that really we don't put Job the other day also said, journalists are not coming out to write books, and we are the ones who are at the core of when we write so many stories about a certain topic. We don't write books, and we are the ones who are sitting with the information. And so I should say that we are at fault in certain levels, that the misunderstanding about the media out there. Do we really put in the effort to make people understand what does it mean that fourth estate is? What does it mean for us to chase a story, to bring the story out?
That's right. Although, again, Nafimane, for example, has started writing some pieces for the Namibian. And again, it's often you see that people are very, very critical of the media, and I've seen that on Twitter, not you personally, but people are very, very critical. All of a sudden, they get their opinion piece published, and they suddenly, praising the media. So they know where to go when they need them. That's also worth saying. Guys, just to finalize, thank you both so much for those very interesting perspectives. We could have talked another 3 hours, I know, and we wouldn't exhaust. But let me ask you both a final question, which is, what are you both going to be doing on Independence Day?
Well, personally, I think...
Going to the stadium.
No, to answer that, I think first I'll have to indicate what independence celebrations is for me. Sure. Because there's a misconception on what independence celebration is. And I firmly believe in celebrating the people that fought for independence. Firmly. I say firmly because I look at society now, and we are struggling to be brave even with the lightest of things. There's no death that will arise. At least we know well enough that you can be an activist now without a lot of harm coming to you. But even that is something a lot of young people are not willing to do. That's why we're not in politics. You're scared of losing your job, or you're scared of falling out of favor with someone, and that's just money. So for me to think that some people were willing to risk their lives, it's a big thing. It's not something that you can water down, regardless of the current political climate, regardless of the current economic climate, where people perhaps have the idea that we should not overemphasize the importance of those that fought for independence because things are so bad
Right.
Currently, I don't believe that. So what I'll be doing, what I do all the time. I sit at home, I sing liberation songs, I watch all liberation videos. I sort of just allow remind myself that look, this is not really about whoever is in government right now and is messing up. It's not about them. It's really about everyone else who was willing to die, literally die.
Their blood waters our freedom.
Yes, I feel that that should be honored, and that's what Independence Day is about.
Ndapewoshali, and maybe before I ask you, just to say, it's also just recently been Women's Day.
Yes.
And again, we talk about the struggle. We often forget when we raise our monuments and street names that we forget about the woman's role in that struggle.
Yes.
And I often think we need a women's monument to celebrate what they did in those years, because I know the suffering that they had. So maybe let's not forget that when we celebrate independence. Ndapewoshali, your views? What will you do?
I'll probably be live tweeting because I'll be working. That's the media.
Okay.
I will be covering the event, but then also yes, I found it beyond words. My jaw dropped when I heard people saying that let's boycott, because I have that image of people waking up, and you wake up and you say that I'm going, I might die. And in fact, as you wake up, there are people coming to say that who died, who is dead. No, they drove a landmine. There's no way. It's almost like someone is going to look at me in my eyes and ask me, one of those people who have died, to say that, so you feel I should not be saying, and you feel that the day when I went out, knowing I might not come back, and I was shot, you feel that is not worth celebrating. So I'll probably be working. And I'm definitely going to be listening to the Ndapeweshali songs.
Okay, good.
But I'll definitely celebrate. I think no matter how, even 100 years from now, there is no way we can ever disregard what was done for us to obtain independence.
I fully agree with you, and we can be very critical of the political realities and what is or isn't achieved.
We should be critical.
But that day is a day we all have to celebrate, because we wouldn't want it any other way.
Yes.
And that was what independence was all about, the chance for us also not to only succeed, but to make our own mistakes.
Yes.
That weren't imposed on us by somebody else. And yes, we make mistakes, but hopefully you, the youth, are galvanizing behind the scenes, and we're going to see big change by the time the next 10 years comes around. I probably won't be here, but I do hope that we are further ahead than we are right now as a country. Thank you both very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gwen.
I think we went horribly over time, huh?